Thanks. Joseph Zeira is here with us. We are going to talk about another angle at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the Middle Orient conflict. Joseph, thanks first of all for accepting. Let me introduce you briefly in Italian. And I understand you know Italian a bit, right?
Yeah, not good enough, but I know.
Non è vero, voleva parlare in italiano, mi ha detto provo e poi si è tirato indietro. In realtà conosce bene l'italiano, prima mi ha parlato in italiano e viene spesso in Italia e ha insegnato spesso in Italia. Allora Joseph è un economista, siamo più o meno coetanei, non sono andato a controllare chi ha un anno di più, chi ha un anno di meno, ci siamo incrociati varie volte nella vita. Lui lavora da molto tempo a Hebrew University a Gerusalemme e oltre a questo lavoro come economista sia teorico che pratico, che io lo conoscevo come una faceva teoria, poi ho scoperto che si interessa concretamente, un po' come faccio io con l'Italia, dell'economia concreta israeliana, che ha scritto sull'impatto del conflitto, della guerra, sull'economia israeliana e sulle condizioni di vita israeliane e palestinesi. Come avete sentito, domani va a raccogliere le olive nella West Bank e non credo vada a toglierle ai palestinesi, credo vada ad aiutare i palestinesi della West Bank a raccogliere. Quindi we'll switch to English because it gives for more smooth conversation. Actually, let me give you the word and introduce yourself, the angle you were telling me before, you know, the two sides as an Israeli that you look at the conflict and the ongoing situation.
Well, first of all, I told you that personally, I was born in Israel and I grew up in Israel, and I served in the army. I served in two wars, in the Yom Kippur War in 1973. I also served in the Lebanon War in 1982. I was an officer in the artillery. And what I took from this service and from these wars is that peace is very important, not only for the Palestinians and the Arabs, but not less for us Israelis. And I've been quite active for peace for many years. On the other hand, I'm also an economist who has some work, as Michele described, in more theoretical economics in general. But I also studied a lot the Israeli economy. I published in 2021, I published my book on the Israeli economy in Princeton University Press. And that book, I know that this book is now translated to Arabic and will be I hope that many people in the Arab world will read it. It's a book about the Israeli economy that studies, among many other things, also the Israeli-Arab conflict. So and I was also within a think tank of economists, half Israelis and half Palestinians. It's called the X Group, after this town Aix-en-Provence, that we worked a lot on what should be the economic aspects of a possible future peace agreement between Israel and Palestine. So in a sense, I have contact with the conflict level and on the professional level. And if I will jump from one position to the other during my talk, you will have to excuse me.
That's fine. Maybe I'll keep you in under control if you jump too much, but it's okay. So you mentioned before, well, that you were involved in the Yom Kippur, right? That's 73.
Yeah.
Which suggests you're probably older than me, because I don't think at 17 or 18.
I'm a little older. I'm 74 years old.
All right. Yeah. Well, so you're
when the war broke up, I was exactly 21 years old.
Yeah. So you were
no 23. Sorry, 23.
Right. So you're 1950, right? Born.
Exactly. October 1950.
Anyhow, go ahead. I was saying, you started out as a military, and I suppose at that time you were not an economist. So how have you lived these 51 years?
Well, I was, in some periods, I was very active politically for peace issues. But most of this period, I had a professional career as an academic economist. I studied macroeconomics mainly, I studied issues of income distribution and macro, technology and macro, technology and economic growth, and also money and inflation. So I'm a very strong monetarist in that sense. Not politically, but in terms of the analysis of inflation and money.
It's one thing we agree among many.
I'm sure. By the way, Israel is a fantastic example where the how do you call it, the inflation tax model of inflation works perfectly well.
Yeah, I'm aware. Well, you remember the old Hookerman, right?
Further than that, we show there is a paper by me and Sargent that we show that the unpleasant monetarist arithmetics worked very well in Israel.
Works very well in now that you understand that now they call it the fiscal theory, the price level, but it's the same thing, right? But let's not get into economics. Let's stick
Okay.
to this, otherwise I knew we would end up talking about something else. All right. Go ahead.
It's tempting, it's tempting.
Speak freely.
Yeah, please.
No, you speak freely. I just shut up.
No. So what I'm trying to say is that I've both been active for peace issues, especially peace with the Palestinians, because after the peace with Egypt, actually this is the only conflict that is really between Israel and the Arab world, the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. And also in my research, I realized two main things. First, that a two-state solution is possible and is practical. The fact that we don't reach it is because there's no political will. It's not because it's impossible. It is possible, but there's no political will. And the second thing I learned is that the
stop
cost...
Stop there. So now you want me to interrupt. Here I am.
Please,
what do you mean it's possible? Obviously, in principle, it's possible. Back in 1947, 48, the United Nations, the British basically, had drawn some maps and said, you guys go here, you guys go there.
It wasn't exactly the British, it was the UN Commission, which was, I think, controlled more by the Americans. If you look at the
map and you look at the Peel map, the difference is very minor.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think now the PLO agreed to a much worse map in terms of their interests, and they still accept it. So the PLO, the Palestinian National Leadership, accepted the two-state solution, even on the lines of 67, which are much more in the favor of Israel, because
the line of 48 are already in the favor, and those of 67 even more.
Yeah, so like 47 gave Israel 55% of the historical Palestine, and the line of 67, which is actually the line of 49, gives Israel 78% of the territory. So
you say the PLO agreed that the view that many of your co-national and everybody supporting the current policy says, no, they never agreed.
Oh, no.
They always refused.
No. They fully agreed to it. And actually, within the negotiations, they also agreed to have the 67 borders with equal area swaps in order to keep some of the Israeli settlements within Israel. So they agreed to that as well.
Right. No, I am aware of that. In fact, there was
you can say
you were supposed to give back.
Michele, right? A lot of people say that the rank and file, the ordinary people, don't accept it. But I'm not a judge of what the ordinary people think or do not think. I know that the national leadership of the Palestinians, which is the PLO, accepted the two-state solution on the borders of 67, even with small swaps of equal size. This is something that is well known.
Right. As if I remember, this was the deal in which some areas in the Negev were to be attached to the Gaza area, right? To compensate.
There are many maps that try to draw such a deal, but I think the map that is closest to reality is called the Geneva Initiative. that was an initiative of both Israelis and Palestinians who convened in Geneva. And they have also maps that were published on the internet. So you can look in the internet and find a potential map. I mean, there are many maps drawn. But I think that the idea of drawing the lines according to the 67 borders with minor change, with minor swaps, is accepted by the Palestinian national leadership.
All right. So why
is not accepted by the Israeli leadership, to my
sorrow.
All
right. Which Israeli leadership does not accept it?
Well, formally, Netanyahu definitely doesn't accept it. He is against Palestinian state altogether. But I think that even Barak, who went to the negotiations, didn't fully accept it. He wanted to have much more than just a few swaps. He wanted to annex something like 10% of the West Bank. And that was one of the reasons why the negotiations collapsed. And then, despite the collapse, Arafat convinced him to continue with the negotiation. And then the Clinton parameters were added. And that was already after the breakout of the Second Intifada in the year 2001.
So one view is that the Second Intifada was fomented intentionally to make the thing collapse.
That is hard to tell. But I can tell you a nice story. I mean, a lot of people blame the Palestinians on the Second Intifada. But there is a famous story about the head of the Israeli intelligence at the time, a general called Amos Malka, who went after a month or two to visit the Central Command. The Central Command deals mainly with the West Bank. And he asked the people there, how many live ammunition did you use in the first month? And they told him something around 1 million bullets. He said, if it's something about 1 million bullets, then we decide the level of the flames in the story. And that is an important episode. Actually, there was even a book later called 1 Million Bullets. So that shows that maybe the first Intifada was sparked by the Palestinians out of their despair of the inability to reach an agreement and to end the occupation. But there were elements in Israel that had a strong interest in flaming it up. As usual, it takes two to tango.
No, I'm quite aware of that, and it's quite clear to me. But in fact, that's not a line that I want to bring you, unless you want to.
Let me say something about it. I agree, and I usually try not to play the blame game when I talk about the Israeli-Arab conflict. I want to analyze it in order not to judge it, but in order to understand the right way to reach a solution. That is the most important thing in my mind. Sometimes you have to enter the blame game on a minor issue because, for example, when people from Israel tells you, how can we make peace with the Palestinians who are so cruel and violent? And then I say, well, in this war, the Palestinians are cruel and violent, and we are cruel and violent, and there is no end to it. The blame game leads nowhere. The important thing is to reach a solution.
Okay, so I tend to see that in your own way, even if I must admit, obviously, I'm infinitely less involved than you, and I'm looking at it from outside. I don't live it inside. But while I've fought for a long time that some kind of two-state solution was a solution and was possible, I don't actually believe it anymore. I think we are facing a tragedy of a biblical proportion that has in itself essentially religious and biblical motives. But let me try to understand what do you mean with possible? Because there is a fact. The Palestinian population, I cannot forget that the Palestinian managed to get a national organization only in 1964, right? And it's only then that they managed to revindicate some national identity and national states. Before, there's the Ottoman leftover, there is the intervention of the Arab countries, there is the use of the population expelled by the Nakba as a political instrument. There is a mess. So in that mess, though, Israel is a developed country with intellectual and a political system and so on. So my first question is, why and what do you think are the deep motive? I'm not interested in the blame game. I'm interested in understanding. What is the understanding, your understanding of the fact, for example, that during that period, this was the Ben Gurion period, they did not decide to extend citizenship to all the Arab Palestinians living in the...
No, they did, to the Palestinians who lived in the state of Israel.
Right. And those
Yes,
that
it is.
lived in the other territories that were occupied by Jordan and Egypt, right?
Yeah. Only after 67 they became under Israeli control.
Right, because Israel took it away from Egypt and Jordan.
And Israel didn't want to give them citizenship because Israel wanted to have as pure as possible Jewish state.
Don't you think that that's the main reason why we will never see a solution?
No, I don't think so. Because, you see, the conflict is in a sense a national conflict. There are two peoples here, the Israeli people and the Palestinian people. And so there should be some right of self-determination to both to Israelis and to Palestinians. Of course, Israel should be a much more democratic state in terms of how it treats the Arab citizens. But that's a different issue in a sense. The main issue is, first of all, we have to lower the flames. We have to reach some agreement based on the national claims of both sides. And then we continue further. That's why, for example, I don't think that there should be settlers left in the Palestinian state as much as possible. Because
there should not be settlements.
Not in the area that goes to the Palestinians. The settlements there should be evacuated, yes. Because they were born in sin. And in the eyes of the Palestinians, they are based on theft of their land. And so if we have swaps that can keep a large percentage of the population of settlers who are close to the green line, that's okay. But those settlements that cannot be within this agreement should be evacuated, or they should agree to become full Palestinian citizens, which I'm sure they won't agree to.
All right, so that's a very strong position, because you know that people don't... I understand what you say, but we have established now since 49, from the Nakba, and then the 67, then the erosion of Gaza, and then the reduction of the area connecting the West Bank to Gaza. Now you're asking, should the settlers be removed? There were settlers moved from Gaza by Sharon. It seems
but what Sharon did was something that was unilateral and brought mostly a lot of damage also, because he didn't give the territories back to the Palestinian leadership. He just took the keys and threw them in the sand. And Hamas was easily the first one to pick them up.
Well, elaborate on this. I want to know your opinion on what happened.
Look, I have a lot of problems with the Oslo Agreement. The Oslo Agreement was a problematic agreement because it didn't go all the way. So it was an interim agreement, and it left most of the problematic issues to the negotiations on the final status agreement. So Jerusalem, refugees, settlements, all this was left. And that's one of the reasons why the process failed. Because you see, when you leave it open too much, then one side can always derail the process. And it's usually the stronger side who controls the territory, which means Israel. Now, I'll say one more thing, Michele, on the issue of moral judgment. One of the reasons I'm afraid to do moral judgment is, let's say that I describe the situation and I say that Israel could do much better. But the problem is not that Israel could do much better because, and they didn't do it because we are evil in some way. I think it's because we're too strong, and when you're too strong, you don't want to make any concession, even a concession that in the long run will pay you back much more. But you're not taking any risk in the short run, and the strength of
Well, I
Israel.
agree. This has always been the case. In fact, Israel has been in a position to make concession de facto. I wouldn't say necessarily after 49, but certainly after 67. Since 67, it's quite clear that the Israeli military, economic, technological position is hugely dominant, especially with the full backup of the United States. And therefore,
that's the point. The United States changed their position around 1970. They decide, even before that, since 67, they decided to support Israel because it fit their specific interest in the region.
No, that's what I said. That's what I said. It's about that time. I mean, you know history better
You're
than
right.
me, but
You're right. Around that time,
yeah.
we know that the decision was
those
made.
that are listening, the United States until then had doubts on which position to take with Israel, so much so that they intervened in 56 in the Suez crisis to push Israel, France, and United Kingdom back. But since the late 60s, it was clear that Israel became strategically part of the American view. One would say, you know, maybe the Israeli and the pro-Israeli lobbies in the United States grew stronger, and therefore also helped taking a stronger
Could
position.
be, but
de facto, that's a situation. We agree. They're stronger. You guys are stronger. Israel is at no risk of disappearing or being wiped out or any of this. But nevertheless, the concession don't happen. Isn't it because at the very end, the war of attrition is nothing but a war of attrition, and it's not so costly? And now we'll go to your economic analysis in terms of lives overall to the Israeli. You know, at the end, Israel has lost what in the total war, even including the Hamas attack? 5,000 people in the space of 70 years, 6,000 people maybe?
Much more.
Much more?
Yeah. Just take 6-day war. Sinai was 170. 6-day war was something like 700. War of attrition was around 1,000. Yom Kippur was 2,600. Lebanon was around 1,000. And then in between, there are many other people killed. And you know, you told me before that I'm a bit extreme because I'm willing to give up the settlements. But I'm asking myself a simple question. If we evacuate the settlements, and it's painful, and there are human beings there, and a lot of other things, but on the other hand of the balance are the lives that we can save. You know, since with Egypt, we didn't have any war with Egypt, and nobody. Well, there may be a few people in some skirmishes on the border, something that's less than 10 people throughout all these 40 years. This is incomparable to what we have now. So we have a very strong interest, in my view, and I know that my view is by my values because I'm basically a humanist, but we have a very strong interest in reaching some solution and avoiding wars and avoiding bloodshed. And that's worth the price of evacuating a territory, with all due respect. Especially that this territory is not really ours. It's an occupied territories, and it should belong to the Palestinians because they need this territory more badly than we need it.
No, I understand that, but now you're making a moral political statement. The issue that I'm trying to push you, by the way, I'm checking, the number of people dead or wounded, including civilian, is much higher. But if I stick to the military death,
most of them are military. Most of
the Israeli deaths are actually civilian in this country. If I stick to the military death, I mean wounded, because that's the problem with the wounded. the pure military deaths and take away the 48 war, it is actually a very small number. It is,
How much?
well, I'm adding up 2005, 6,
I think it's more than
7.
10,000
It
by
may get
far.
to 7 with the end of this, because now there are casualties in the army and in the
So,
police.
you know what? 10,000 for me, it's a whole world.
I understand, but no, I understand perfectly. But
And especially the price,
distributed over a very long period of time. That's the problem.
and also the if the war continues, usually it escalates, and more people are dying. In this last war, there are more people than the previous skirmishes in Gaza. I don't
No,
want to add it.
absolutely. Yeah, on both sides. Yes.
So we
But
have
anyhow, but let's back to the main political thing. The one part I am make me skeptical, and I wish you could convince me, is while I understand you're as a moral position and maybe also as a political, very far-sighted position, it is demanding too much, in my opinion, to the far-sightedness of a part of the Israeli population to compensate for the feeling, which is very ideologically supported, that that's our biblical land and we want it. And on the other hand, the Palestinians and the Arabs are not to be trusted. In any case, the only way you can dwell with them is with force. I'm not, look, these are not my positions, not my view,
I
but I'm
understand.
saying
I
that
understand.
is
But
the
first of
view you get on the other side.
no, first of all, I'm used to be a minority in my country. That's okay.
Yeah,
I've been a minority
sorry,
for
I'm a
many years.
minority in mine, but I play
That's fine. That's
contrarian.
fine. As long as I believe that my position makes a lot of sense, then I stick to it. Unless you convince me otherwise. But I want to say more than that. I mean, the fact that I view wars and the casualties of war as a huge price, I don't think this has to do with morality. This has to do with values. I value life more than pieces of land. I'm sorry, but that's my position. And I think it's a reasonable position to a large extent. But I also found that there are very large costs to the conflict which are purely economical. For example, we have too long the people who go to regular service in the army serve 3 years for boys and 2 years for girls, and it's a huge cost. I calculated this cost because the cost is you lose human capital because you enter the labor market much later. So it amounts to a cost of something like more than 5% of GDP.
And in spite of that, Israel has become a very rich country.
It could be much richer. I calculate, no, it could be 30% richer. That's not a small thing. If you could if you could explain to Israeli citizens that if they reach an agreement with the Palestinians, their income will be higher by 30%, I'm not sure what they will say about it. But I'm sure most of them will agree to that. You know, it's not only the conscription, it's also the high risk. Even before the war, the high risk because of the conflict makes capital in Israel much smaller than, for example, in Western Europe and even in the US. Our capital output ratio in the business sector is something like 1, the ratio, while in the US it's 1.6 and in Western Europe it's 2. That means that we use much less capital and our output is much lower. That amounts to 26% of GDP. That's a lot, Michele. That's not a minor issue.
I'm not saying it's a minor issue. I'm just saying apparently your co-citizens don't seem to, right?
You know, no newspaper, no media outlet published anything from my book about my book and stuff. And it's not a coincidence. We are also, the media in Israel, especially now, is hiding information from people. They don't show anything of what happens in Gaza. There's only
That I
one
have
news.
noticed. That I've been following even Haaretz and Jerusalem
Haaretz
Post.
shows. Haaretz reports.
A bit. I wouldn't say it shows completely, but it's better.
Maybe. So, but
Jerusalem Post is
Haaretz is far unique, far outside the spectrum of the Israeli media. In most Israeli media, especially in the television, you see nothing, which is heartbreaking.
But doesn't that so? But that though indicates that the reality on the terrain, Joseph, is very much against any hope, because there is at this point a vast majority of Israelis that, for good or for bad, have accepted that the approach is kick them out.
Well,
and this is something. Let me say why I say that. I say that because I think it's a necessary act of realism the Western societies have to undertake, recognize the reality on the ground, and decide to take responsibility. At the very end, Israel exists mostly because of Europeans' guilt and responsibility. And it is, for good or for bad, the creation of European citizens, Jewish and non-Jewish. And most of what happened
well,
there,
why don't you say it out loud? UK imperialism in the area and later US imperialism.
absolutely, no, bro. I have been saying it repeatedly. Yeah, it's in fact it's the only way to understand. It's UK and a bit of France imperialism, followed by the US one. Absolutely, no, yeah, totally. And therefore there is a debate that has to be brought from Israel into Europe and into the United States to say, well, let's take responsibility. At the end of the day, it's our choice. You see, that's the point. It's no longer, in my opinion, the Israelis' population choice, or better, to the extent we leave it to the Israelis' population choice, it's going to end up with a biblical disaster. Only if the Western countries take it as their responsibility and decide which side of history is going to stay, then the thing has a hope to get out. Because I don't see any hope. The very reasonable, very humans, very rational, and respectful of an old civil rights tradition, a position like yours will ever succeed to move the Israeli public opinion in the right direction. That's why I keep talking about this in Italian, in Spanish, or whatever I can, because I think it's our responsibility. I don't know what you think.
First of all, I fully agree with you, and I mentioned it before when I said that Israel is much stronger. It's not much stronger solely because of our high brains or great muscles. We are stronger partly also because of the American and European support to Israel, for sure. And I would be very happy if their support at some point will push us in the right direction. Because, sometimes I tend to give people an analogy of a drug addict. Someone is a drug addict, and you're a good friend. What do you do when he wants to have another joint? You give him the joint? That's friendship? That's not friendship. That's anti-friendship. You try to send him to rehab. No? Exactly the same thing. I mean, we are addicted to violence, to force, to occupation. The right way is not to enable us to have more, is to finally start the process of rehab. So I would be very happy if the position in Europe would change and would be closer to mine. But I cannot build on that personally, because as long as I stay in Israel and I live in Israel, I have to talk and argue and to try to convince my own people, even if I'm in a small minority. That's my duty in this debate.
Oh, no, I'm not telling you to stop. I am saying you guys should make an effort to influence the Jewish communities abroad to recover some of their original identity and to force this debate, to force European elites in particular to face their responsibility. The same way they are running away from their responsibility in Ukraine, they're running away from their responsibility in Israel and the Middle Orient in general. They're accepting a situation of high violence that you described, and they're turning their eyes apart and pretending that the other side is just a bunch of monsters that can be dealt with only with a sword.
But here I must tell you that you have to be a bit more careful on that.
All right.
I'm limited in my ability to talk to the international community and tell them put pressure on Israel. In a situation of a war, and with a government that inching its way toward fascism, it's close to be dangerous for me. So I did sign the petition recently calling for outside pressure, but I think that it's playing around the edges in a sense. You understand what I say?
No, I understand. I understand because of the internal situation in Israel. But in fact, that's why I was.
It's terrible. It's terrible because the government is not only waging a war against Palestinians. It also has, in order to bolster its war against the Palestinians, it also solidifies its holding of the Israeli society by, for example, weakening the legal system and stuff like that. The weakening of the legal system was not something without connection to the conflict. It was strongly connected to the conflict and to their position of the conflict. They wanted that in a situation of war, they'll have the freedom to kick out the Palestinian population. And they knew that so they wanted to weaken the legal system that it will not disturb them. Or, for example, they are now planning to pass laws that will make it even more difficult to the extreme left parties, the more what they call the Arab parties,
I've seen that. Yes, I've seen
will
that.
not be able to go to election. So it's a problem. I mean, I vote to one of these parties. I will not have someone to vote for the next election, probably.
Yeah, I've seen, and this is actually totally ignored by the Western press as well. These very few people are talking about the changes in the legislation to make.
It didn't pass yet. They just it's on the agenda of the Knesset.
Being proposed, right?
But it can pass because the center what's called center left opposition, they will support it too. I'm afraid.
Oh, that's what you think will do.
I'm afraid. They supported now. For example, there was a smaller legislation on limiting UNRWA.
Yes, I've seen that.
And it got support from Yesh Atid and from Gantz and from many center politics. And the Labour Party was supposed to be more on the left. They didn't show up to the discussion. So this is the type of opposition that you can rely on in Israel.
Well, you're giving a very, so the type of community you belong has no ability to reach out to the Jewish community in Italy, Spain, France, UK, and so on.
We can, and I'm having some contacts with people who support peace in the Italian community, for example. With I don't know if you know Giorgio Gomel used to be in the Bank of Italy.
No, I don't know him personally. I know he is, but I don't know.
He's very active. There is an organization called J-Call, which is similar to J Street in America, but it operates in Europe. And there are other. I'm trying to be in contact with some people. It's not easy, and also I'm not really a politician. I'm an economist. I'm a citizen, but I'm not a politician. So there are some things that I really don't know how to do well. And I also have some life of my own, and I'm not so young anymore, and I have grandchildren I have to take care of, and
No,
so forth.
I don't want to make it a personal thing. I'm just thinking politically of the type of movement, the type of people.
Yeah,
So
I understand. No, I
the
understand. But
description you're giving is one of a movement that is not only very small and minority, it's also very explicitly, how can I say, obstacled and being marginalized by the political.
yeah,
When
well,
you say fascism, what do you mean? It seems to me more,
I mean, there are some elements in the government today that are pure fascist. People like Ben Gvir or Smotrich are, I can't tell the difference much.
fascist in the sense that Jabotinsky was fascist.
No, much more. No comparison. Jabotinsky was a Democrat.
Jabotinsky was fascist. I mean, he went to learn his lessons from
Ah.
Mussolini directly.
No, but he detached himself from fascism very soon. When at the beginning, it was hard to realize where Mussolini is going. So you could say that many Jews in Italy supported Mussolini at the beginning.
A number of Jews supported Mussolini because of the so-called red threat. But other than that, yes.
For example, fascism is a delicate issue, and it's hard in Israel. It's harder to raise it against people because then they say, "What? We are against Jews?" You know, it shows how stupid they are, in a sense. But we do have, it's a problematic term because it's anachronistic in a sense. Fascism was strong in the 20s and the 30s.
Yeah. Well,
When
it's
you
a
have it,
general
when you
word
have it
for.
today, it's always different.
So you're describing an evolution of a situation in Israel that makes it a closer and closer religious-based state with a very extreme authoritarian interpretation of what religion means and religious identity, ethnic identity, national identity, set on a path of destruction, which tends to isolate and silence the dissent voice and whoever and the facts. But as long as it has the back of the United States and of Europe, but mainly of the United States on the military side, it will do and it will succeed. That's the thing you're describing.
Yeah, well, the support of the US, we have to be to develop it a bit more, the analysis of it, because it's not just the Jewish lobby. First of all, there is another lobby that has interest in that, which is the military industrial complex.
Absolutely.
The arm producers in the US. And second, you have, I mean, especially since Iran, the Islamic Revolution in Iran, the Islamic Revolution in Iran, which is actually more than Islamic Revolution, it's a Shiite revolution. And
Absolutely.
in a sense, that has a very different meaning because until, in all the Gulf countries, and the Gulf countries are far from being very democratic, as you well know, the Shiites are quite large minorities. I'm not sure we have accurate numbers about Saudi Arabia, for example, but the percentage of Shiites is something around 40% or even more. And in Bahrain, for example, there is a majority of Shiites, and so on. And the Shiites were always the
underdogs.
The underdogs in all these countries. So when suddenly the Shiites took control over Iran, the Shiite leadership, all these countries became panicky about it. They even, at some point, very early on, they called on Saddam Hussein to try and help them. And he started the Iraq-Iran war with their money, with their financial support. So the Israeli leadership understood it very early on, especially Netanyahu, and he decided to do warmongering against Iran in order to gain the sympathy of the Gulf countries and to distance them from the Palestinian issue. And he actually did quite well. Only now Hamas succeeded in threatening Saudi Arabia so much that they backed from the idea to do peace with Israel. But we were not far from that. So the whole thing got complicated because the US definitely has interest against Iran because of the precarious situation of many Shiites in the Gulf countries. So in that sense, I don't think that Biden and Trump are so different. You remember that Trump, when he became president, what was the first country he went to visit? Saudi Arabia. And his son-in-law does business with them all day long.
No, I'm quite aware of this. I have no particular, surprise or anything. I'm quite aware. The point is to look positively and try, as you said, try to find a way where there is an angle of pressure. And it seems to me that for difficult that it is, for and risky, in fact, for people like you, that it is, given the current situation in Israel, there is no hope for a different.
Well, I think that the right way to start the movement is to go to the two-state solution. But the two-state solution was so far failed because people didn't really mean it. People just used it as a talking point. But the moment you try to deal with it and you go into the details, you realize, first of all, that it's possible, that it's practical, and that you can do it. And that could be a good leverage here, because everyone is committed to the two-state solution. The Arab countries in the Arab Peace Initiative, all of them committed.
Yeah, the Arab Peace Initiative insists on that. So the last thing, and then I'll let you go because you have to wake up early tomorrow. Given that, how serious you think, how committed you think the Saudi Arabian are to a two-state solution, or isn't it just a makeup thing that they keep repeating?
I'll tell you what this guy BLS said. Salman bin something. Yeah. Prince Salman. Said, personally, I don't give a shit about the Palestinians.
Right. That seems to be my impression. Nobody gives a shit about Palestinians.
Yeah, but my population does give a lot about the Palestinians. And therefore, I'm not free to do what I'd like to do. And let me remind you another interesting event. 2 years before this war, there was a Mondial in Qatar. You followed it, huh?
Yeah, well, a bit.
A bit, anyway. Israel sent a lot of correspondence because it could do it because it was an international event. And they went to Qatar and they complained, I remember in the television all the time, why the people here hate us? Why all the Arabs who came to the Mondial hate us? And why do they shout all the time, Palestine, Palestine? They didn't understand it. They don't understand the natural sympathy in the Arab world to the Palestinian issue. It's a very strong thing. And everyone who's tried to avoid it, to ignore it, like this MBS, whatever his exact name. I mean, I'm too old to remember.
Yeah. It's too complicated.
Muhammad bin Salman, I think. But anyway. So everyone who tries to ignore it gets a slap in the face at some point or another. And that's another thing that we should try to build on. The sympathies of the to the Palestinians.
Well, we understand that is classified and washed away from people's conscience by being classified as anti-Semitism.
Yeah, but between me and you, Islam was never anti-Semitic. Islam treated Jews much better than Christianity.
I actually know that's not always,
not perfect
until the issue
until the 20th century, until the Zionism started the conflict between Islam and look.
I totally agree. Many Islamic people insist on that, and many historians have proved it, and I don't think there's much doubt. Problem is, Joseph, we live in the 21st century, and at the beginning of the 20th, things turn around, and the choice.
Well, but my wife's father, may he rest in peace, grew up in Cairo. He came to Israel early on in 1950. He said until 48 we felt nothing. We had very good relations with the Arabs.
Oh yeah, the expulsion of the Jewish was all following the Nakba.
No, that was even later than that. That was in 56, after the Suez campaign.
I said was following.
Following, yeah, you're right. But he said in 48 everything started to change.
Yes.
So we have to keep this in mind. I mean, it's a sad thing that Islam, that was relatively okay to, I mean, not perfect, but they benefit from our presence there, and they treated us.
They certainly had tolerated the brothers. I mean, well, okay, let's not go back in history. I mean, even Muhammad tolerated the second Jewish oasis once he left.
I don't know the details about Islam, but I know
there is this story that I've
were
documented many times.
We were, before the Holocaust, the biggest tragedy of Jews were the expulsion from Spain. That was the biggest thing for Jewish people, and that was done by the Reconquista, by the Christians. And actually, the main Islamic kingdom at the time, which was the Ottoman Empire, they told the Jews, "Come to us, we welcome you," and they sent ships to bring the Jews to the Ottoman Empire. I mean, this is important. When the Crusaders entered Jerusalem in 1010, they killed all the Jews. And only after Saladin conquered Jerusalem again, he called all the Jewish leaders and told them the city was liberated. Come, return to the city. It's a famous letter. It's in a museum in Jerusalem, by the way, a state museum in Jerusalem, on the history of the city.
Listen, I'll let you go. It seems that we've gone through enough to make it clear what the situation is, and we could go around the problem now for maybe very long. But
yeah, but if you want to continue on some specific point later on, you know how to get me.
I'll be happy to, and if you're interested, we can try to keep in touch on this and talk again in the future.
And maybe also talk also about subsidizing patents. I mean, I have a paper that strengthens your point.
All right, maybe we'll talk about that too.
Or maybe on that we'll talk not for public.
Well, it's okay, but my public is used also to listen to very detailed economic discussions. Listen, stay safe tomorrow in the West Bank, given what you said. Yeah. I understand what you go and do.
They just changed the village where we go to. That's why I have to get up earlier.
Okay. So sleep well and stay safe. Thanks, Joseph.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Good night. Good night.
Bye-bye.